The moment the senior investigator from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division called my name in that conference room, I watched my brother's face do something I had never seen it do before. It went completely still. Not the stillness of calm. The stillness of a man whose entire constructed world had just cracked down the middle. My name is Adeline Voss, and the day I walked into that boardroom, on the 41st floor of the Whitmore building in downtown Chicago, I was supposed to be there as a junior financial analyst. The person nobody CCs on the important emails. The one who gets asked to reformat slides at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. What my brother didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had spent the last 2.5 years building the case that was about to dismantle everything he'd spent a decade constructing. Let me take you back to where it actually started. It was Christmas Eve, 3 years ago. My family has always done Christmas the same way. My grandmother's house in Naperville, the same green bean casserole nobody actually eats, the same argument about whether to open gifts on Christmas Eve or Christmas morning. My brother and his wife always arrived late. They always arrived in something new. That year it was a silver Porsche Cayenne, and I watched my dad stand at the window and say, quietly, mostly to himself, "That's a nice car." Not jealous, just noting it. My dad has driven the same 2009 Camry since before I started college. My brother's name is Everett. He is 6 years older than me. He has, for as long as I can remember, operated in a completely different gravitational field from the rest of our family. Our parents are both teachers. He went into finance right out of Northwestern, and never looked back. He was sharp, charming, the kind of person who could explain a complex investment vehicle to a room full of skeptics and have them nodding along inside of 5 minutes. His firm, Vantage Capital Strategies, was boutique, but it had built a very specific reputation over the years as a high-performance wealth management shop for clients who wanted aggressive returns and minimal questions. I had been working there for 14 months when I found something I wasn't supposed to find. It wasn't even dramatic. I was running reconciliation reports on a Thursday afternoon, cross-checking client account statements against trade confirmations. The kind of work that's so monotonous it could put you to sleep mid-spreadsheet. And I found a discrepancy. A small one, initially. A client whose portfolio showed a 12.4% return for the quarter in the official statement, but whose underlying trade activity, when you actually mapped it out, only accounted for about 7.8%. I flagged it internally, sent an email to my direct supervisor, a man named Grant who had a habit of responding to everything I sent him with 3 words or fewer. His response to that one was, reconciliation lag, normal. And then nothing. I went back and looked at 6 more accounts. The pattern was consistent. I want to be clear about something. I didn't want it to be what it looked like. Everett was my brother. My family had celebrated when I got that job. My mother told me it would be a real opportunity. My grandmother had called it a blessing. I sat with what I had found for 3 weeks before I let myself say the word out loud, even just to myself, in my car, on the way home. Fraud. The way it worked, and I understand this more completely now than I did then, was deceptively simple. Vantage Capital was inflating reported returns on client statements. The real returns were going into accounts, but not the accounts they belonged to. A percentage was being quietly siphoned, routed through a series of fee structures, and what appeared to be administrative overhead charges, into accounts that had very clean paperwork and very little legitimate purpose. The total amount skimmed over approximately 9 years was, by the time federal investigators finished reconstructing it, just over $14 million. $14 million. From people who had trusted my brother with their retirement savings, with the money they were saving for their kids' educations, with their dead parents' estates. After those 3 weeks, I made a decision. I drove to the public library. Not the one near my apartment, a different one across town, and I used a computer there to research what whistleblower protections looked like under the Dodd-Frank Act. I wrote nothing down. I memorized what I could. I went home and I didn't sleep much. 2 days later, I walked into the Chicago field office of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and asked to speak to someone about potential securities fraud. The agent I ended up speaking with was a woman named Sandra Obi. She was patient, thorough, and had a way of asking questions that made you feel like every answer mattered, even the ones you thought were too small to mention. She listened to everything I had. She looked at the screenshots I had taken on my personal phone, which, she told me gently, was not the recommended method, but was still useful. She asked me if I was willing to keep working at Vantage while they built a case. She was honest with me about what that would involve and what it would cost. "This is your brother," she said at one point. Not a question. "Yes," I said. She gave me a moment. Then she asked if I wanted to continue. I said yes. What Sandra's team needed was access I already had but needed to expand carefully. I had been a junior analyst with limited visibility into the firm's back-office operations. Over the next 8 months, I was asked to request additional responsibilities, to volunteer for projects that would bring me closer to the account management side. I did. Grant, my supervisor, had no reason to be suspicious. I was performing well, I was enthusiastic, I didn't ask uncomfortable questions. I was, in his words at my annual review, a real team player. I filed the most accurate internal financial reports of anyone at that firm. And I sent copies of the relevant ones to Sandra every 2 weeks through a process I will not describe in detail here. There was a moment. I think about this one a lot. About 11 months in. It was a summer Friday, and most of the office had already cleared out by 3. Everett was still at his desk. I was finishing something at mine, the last one on our side of the floor. He came over and sat on the edge of my desk and said, "You know what I like about you being here?" I looked up. "You're careful," he said. "You don't cut corners. You check your work." He smiled. "You got that from Dad, I think. Mom and I were more instinctive, but you're a checker." He tapped the top of my monitor with 2 fingers. "That's valuable. Don't let anyone tell you different." I held eye contact and I said, "Thanks, Ev." He went back to his office. I sat there for a while after that. I think about the fact that he wasn't wrong. I am careful. I do check my work. And that's exactly what caught him. 8 months before the operation came to a close, something happened that I hadn't anticipated. A client came into the office. A retired teacher from Elmhurst, named Beverly Hong. She was 63. She had been a client of Vantage for 7 years, since the death of her husband. She was in to review her annual statement, and she brought her daughter with her. I was not in that meeting, but I saw them in the lobby afterward. Beverly had the particular expression of a person who has just been told something reassuring that they almost believe. Her daughter was holding her arm. I went to Sandra that week. I told her about Beverly. I said I knew we needed more time, but I needed to understand what was happening to people like her right now, while we waited. Sandra pulled Beverly's account without me asking. She called me back the following afternoon. "She's down about $60,000 from where she should be," Sandra said. "Over 7 years. $60,000. I said, "Okay." Sandra said, "I know. We moved up the timeline. Here is what happened with my father, and it is the part of this that I have had the hardest time sitting with. About 2 years into the investigation, I discovered that Everett had quietly funneled a portion of his skimmed funds through a mechanism that involved our father's name. My dad, who taught 8th grade math for 31 years and knew almost nothing about investment vehicles, had a small retirement account that had been originally managed through a different firm. Everett had, without my father's meaningful understanding, consolidated it into Vantage years earlier, under the premise of simplifying things and getting better returns. That account had been used, in a technical and largely invisible way, as a pass-through point for several transactions. My father did not know. He had signed paperwork he didn't fully understand. The way most people sign paperwork they trust a family member to explain. His name was attached to something that, depending on how federal investigators chose to interpret it, could create serious complications for him. I sat in the parking lot of a Walgreens for 40 minutes after Sandra told me. I called my mom. Just to hear her voice. I didn't tell her why I was calling. We talked about the garden she was trying to start in the backyard. I said the tomatoes sounded good. After we hung up, I sat there for another 10 minutes before I could drive. I told Sandra I needed her to be certain. I needed her team to be certain before anything proceeded, that my father's involvement was demonstrably involuntary. She told me they already were. She said his account would be audited, cleared, and his name formally separated from any transactional association with the fraud. It would be documented and disclosed. I believed her. But I also couldn't unknow what I'd found. And I couldn't stop imagining how my dad was going to look when he found out that the paperwork he signed in Everett's office with a cup of coffee on the desk had been part of something like this. The operation moved in November, 14 people across 3 firms, including 2 brokers at other shops, who had helped Vantage route transactions, a compliance officer who had been paid to look the other way, and a bank contact who had processed suspicious wire transfers without filing the required suspicious activity reports. They were taken in on a Tuesday morning, coordinated across 4 locations. Everett was picked up in the parking garage of the Whitmore building, on his way to a breakfast meeting with a potential investor. I was not there for the arrest. I was already in the building, 17 floors above, waiting in a conference room with Sandra and 2 other investigators, and the assistant U.S. attorney, who would be handling the prosecution. I had been working with them to prepare documentation for what would ultimately be 7 days of interviews and grand jury testimony. 2 weeks after Everett was arrested, the firm notified clients of the investigation. A court-appointed receiver took over the assets. The process of calculating losses and beginning restitution was just starting. Beverly Hoang was on the list. The moment I want to tell you about. The one that broke something open in me in a way that I'm still not sure how to describe. Happened at the courthouse, the afternoon the indictments were formally announced. Everett's lawyer had arranged for him to surrender voluntarily. I was there with Sandra, in a hallway off the main atrium, when I saw him come through the doors. He saw me at the same time. He stopped walking. The lawyer beside him kept moving for 2 steps before noticing. Everett didn't say anything. His wife, who was with him, grabbed his arm. And I thought, this is the face of someone who has just understood something completely, possibly for the first time. His lawyer started moving again. Everett let himself be moved. He didn't look back. My mother found out the way I had feared she would, from a news alert on her phone while she was at school between 2nd and 3rd period. She called me from the parking lot on her lunch break. She didn't say much. She asked if I had known. I told her I had. She was quiet for a very long time. How long? She asked. 2.5 years, I said. She made a sound I had never heard her make before. Not anger. Not exactly. Something closer to the particular grief of understanding that a thing you thought you knew has been a different shape the entire time. I needed you to be safe, I said. If you had known, it would have put you in a harder position. You and Dad. I needed you not to know. She said, I understand that. And I believe she did, intellectually. But understanding something and being okay with it are not the same thing, and I knew better than to confuse them. My dad's reaction was quieter. He called me 2 days later, after Sandra's team had officially cleared him. He said, they told me about the account. What Everett used it for. He paused. I signed that paperwork, Addie. I sat in his office and I signed it without reading it because he was my son and I trusted him. I didn't know what to say that would be useful. Did you always know? He asked. That I was involved? I found out about 14 months in, I said. That's when I made sure the investigators knew it was involuntary. They had already confirmed it by then. They were clear about it, Dad. They never considered you a suspect. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, thank you for that. It wasn't the thank you that got me. It was the fact that he felt he needed to say it at all. My sister-in-law filed for separation 3 months after the indictments. I don't know the full shape of what she knew or didn't know or suspected. I won't speculate about that here. What I know is that she had 2 young children, and that whatever she understood about her husband's business, she now had to explain something to those kids that no parenting book covers adequately. Everett was convicted on 19 counts, including securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. He was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. The restitution order covered approximately $12.5 million of the $14 million in identified losses. Beverly Hoang received a check. It didn't undo 7 years, but it was something. There is a woman who found me, about 4 months after sentencing, through a victim advocacy organization that had been coordinating with federal investigators. Her name was Cecily, and she was 47, and she had been a client of Vantage for 5 years, since a settlement from a workplace injury that had partially disabled her. The settlement was supposed to cover her for the rest of her life. She lost roughly $89,000 to my brother's fraud. She had already been back to work part-time, standing work, which her injury made difficult. To cover the gap, she didn't ask me to explain myself. She didn't ask why it took as long as it did. She asked one question: was it real? Was he actually doing it on purpose? Or was it just a mistake that got out of hand? I told her the truth. It was intentional. It was documented. It had been ongoing for nearly a decade. There was no version of events where it was accidental. She nodded. She said, okay. And then she thanked me for telling her that, because knowing it was deliberate meant she could stop wondering if maybe she had misunderstood something, or missed a warning sign, or made an error of her own. The wondering, she said, had been the hardest part. I am a financial examiner now, working with a regulatory compliance firm that contracts with both federal agencies and private institutional clients. Sandra Obi sent me a handwritten card when I started the job. It is still in my desk drawer. My relationship with my mother is better than it was in the months right after everything broke open. We talk on the phone every Sunday. We don't talk about Everett very much, but we don't avoid it either. He exists in our family the way a structural crack in a wall exists. You know it's there, you've had it assessed. You know it's not going to bring the ceiling down, see? But you also can't pretend the wall is what it was before. My dad still drives the 2009 Camry. I have been asked, more than once, whether I would do it the same way if I could go back. Whether the cost to my family was worth it. Whether I regret how long it took. I think about Cecily standing in her kitchen on bad pain days, wondering if she made the mistake. I think about Beverly Hoang and her daughter in that lobby. I think about the 4 other clients I learned about during the investigation who had made financial decisions. Deferring medical procedures, delaying retirement, deciding not to sell their homes, based on account statements that were lying to them. I can't answer the question about worth. I don't think it's mine to answer. The people who can answer it are the ones who sat across a desk from my brother and handed him their trust, and then their money, and watched us make both disappear. What I can tell you is this. I was 27 years old when I started finding those in those spreadsheets, and I had spent most of my life being the quieter one, the younger one, The one who went into finance and ended up at the family firm instead of somewhere with a name people recognized. I was, by most assessments, not the impressive one. Not the one who was going places. I was the one sending formatting edits at 10 on a Friday night. I am careful. I check my work. My brother said so himself. Right before everything ended. He wasn't wrong. And he didn't see it coming. And I've spent a long time understanding that those two things are not unrelated. The people who assume someone is unremarkable are also the ones who stop watching them. And the people who stop watching are the ones who never notice what's being built in the quiet.